we're going to do a little review for those of us who can't remember what we did last week. To begin at the beginning. So as we say in all beginning genealogy classes, you start with yourself and you work your way back. Your goal for Irish records research is to find that immigrant ancestor that came over from Ireland, whether it be Northern Ireland or the South. So for doing that, we need the hometown that they came from, or at least the county, at the very least, the county they came from. So we're going to gather as much information as we can for every source in the US that we can. So that's going to include census records and voter lists, naturalization records, vital records, because there might be a particular vital record that might list that hometown, whether it be for a child or for another person. Voter lists and registration, cemetery records. I've had some luck with cemetery records in the past. Church records, passenger lists. That's the key there. That's one of the ways you're going to find the hometown. If there are still living relatives who know about the ancestors from the home country, talk to them and get information. And as we mentioned last week, social media groups are a big thing. Join some Irish Facebook groups or Twitter groups or Instagram groups to get some information from the different people that are also probably looking for similar things that you're looking for. And what we need to know first, we need to know the jurisdictions that we're going to be looking for in particular records, because each record you're going to find is going to be asking you for either a county or a province or a townland or a parish, something to that effect. And we'll need to know that. So if you know the town that your ancestry came from, it's very easy to find out that other information. Also, too, if their religion, such as if they were Catholic, there will be a lot of information in church records, not only in Ireland, but also here in the US. So those are some other options that we need to be investigating in order to find out what the town is. The other thing that we'll be looking at is the history of Ireland. So we want to know, why did these folks migrate? Why did they leave Ireland and come to the US? A lot of us probably have ancestors that came over during the Great Famine, but there are other instances too where immigration was done. And what was it that was going on in their lives that affected that? What about the records? How did Ireland's history affect their records? Their tax, land records, definitely their census records, vital records, church and probate records. So then we go through the jurisdictions, going from largest to smallest. We start at the provinces, the 4 provinces of Ireland. Then we go down to the county level, the barony, the poor law unions, which are now called superintendent registrar districts, the parishes, which are both civil and ecclesiastical, and under ecclesiastical will have Roman Catholic as well as Anglican or the Church of Ireland. And then the smallest unit we're going to find will be the townland. And these are the 4 provinces: Ulster, Connacht, Leinster, and Munster. And here's another map, which we give out the actual counties within each of the provinces. And we did talk last week about why Northern Ireland or Ulster is divided into 2 areas. And just for historical perspective, this is all of the baronies that were in Ireland at the time. Remember too, a lot of these divisions will only apply to certain records. A lot of these divisions they don't even use nowadays. But for historical perspective, that's what you'll be looking for. So if it says you need to know what the barony is, this map kind of gives you an idea of how many there were and where they were located. And here's a map of the poor law unions. And then remember, two types of parishes. We have the civil parishes, which is what they used when they started doing civil registration. They will have similar names and boundaries as the Anglican Church or the Church of Ireland boundaries. Until 1870, the Anglican Church was the established church, and it was the only church according to government policies that mattered in Ireland. Then you have the ecclesiastical, mainly the Roman Catholic Church. And they also had boundaries as well for their parishes, but they would be different, or they might be similar to the Anglican or civil parishes. It just depends. And we did show examples of the difference between the two last week. And then finally, the townlands, the 61,000 plus townlands that Ireland has, which were named after man-made or topographical features, could range anywhere from a few acres to thousands of acres, depending on the location. This is the smallest unit. Remember too, that when you're doing your investigating, some names were used over and over again. Some names were townlands as well as counties, might have been the name of a city as well, which can be confusing. And you'll also find several townlands within a particular parish as well. And we did show you an example last week of the different divisions and how they kind of overlapped county boundaries at some point. And we talked about the early and late colonial periods last week. So this time around, we're going to talk from 1793 up to 1998. We're going to go through the pre-famine as well as the famine years, then post-famine to the partition, and the partition to the Troubles. So pre-famine. Remember, we talked about last week the penal laws. In an effort to get as many Irish as they thought they possibly could converted to the Anglican Church, a lot of laws, which they called the penal laws, were passed in order to prevent Roman Catholics from practicing their religion, holding government office, a lot of different things, as well as other dissenters, which they considered to be non-Anglican, like the Presbyterians or the Protestants. By 1791, there were laws passed to relieve some of the pressure on these different religious groups. The Crown found out that it wasn't successful. Trying to force people to convert their religion was not being successful. So they decided that they would start relieving some of the Catholic and non-dissenters of certain political, educational, and economic disabilities. Also during this time period, you have the Passenger Acts in 1803. Remember, we talked about last week, they were using propaganda in order to get a lot of the Irish to immigrate to another country. Well, they found out that then they had nobody to tend the land. So they passed these passenger lists where the price of travel went up. So naturally, they couldn't afford it. So immigration dropped significantly during this time period. And then by 1829, you have what they call the Catholic Emancipation. This is where most of the penal laws were repealed. The Catholic Church was able to begin keeping registers again. So you would find baptisms, marriages, as well as burials in Catholic registers. And also during this time period, we have in 1838, the poor law unions, which were created to administer relief to the poor. So if your ancestor may have immigrated during this pre-famine time period, some of the records and sources you will be able to find, since the Catholic Church was now starting to keep records, a lot of the parishes may have started at this point. Some of them started a little later, but it's always good to look. You'll still have Anglican Church records. You'll also have tax records. The tile allotment books from 1823 to 38 will have the names of the townland occupants. This is one of those instances where the tax records might be done by parish and then within parish, they might be also indexed by townland. And then we have the poor law and workhouse records, which go beyond this particular date range, but this is where they will start. So if you think that maybe your ancestor worked in the workhouse or lived in the workhouse at some period of time, you'd have records to take a look at there. And that's where the poor law union divisions would come in. Then we have land records. If you were Protestant or Presbyterian, you're more than likely to have land records. Catholics, maybe not. And then our census substitutes. Again, you're looking at different tax records, land records, etc., to take care of the fact that a lot of the earlier censuses were destroyed. And we'll get into more in that later on. You might find also some religious, quote unquote, religious censuses, because a lot of the times the Crown would require, like the Anglican church ministers, do a survey of their area, whether they be Catholic or Anglican, and just find out who's living there and what religion they are. And then we have church records. Baptismal and marriage records before 1864 are going to be basically ecclesiastical, because in 1864 is when the civil registration started. Only about 20% of registers kept burial information until around 1880. And you're only going to see the name of the deceased probably, and the date of the burial, not necessarily the date of death. And again, I'm going to refer back to John Grenham's book, Tracing Your Irish Ancestors, and his website, Irish Ancestors, because he has a lot of information on where you can look in a particular area, if you know the county, if you know the parish, where those records might be kept if they are still in existence. And again, we're basically focusing on a Catholic at this point. Most Catholic parishes did not keep registers until the 19th century because of the penal laws. But if you do find a record, that might be the only record of a person's existence, because remember too that a lot of the Irish were poor and they didn't own land, or they weren't voting, or they probably weren't being educated for one reason or another. The original Catholic Church records were held in the parish and the property of the parish priest. A lot of them are in fragile condition, simply because they've probably been kept in a basement somewhere. Many of them are in Latin, but the Latinization of the names, etc., is pretty easy to figure out. If the parish register, and a lot of the parish registers have been digitized, and they are on several websites, including Find My Past, Family Search, and the Southern Irish government website, irishgenealogy.ie. But if you can't find it there and you want to contact the actual parish, just remember that you might not be able to see it yourself, but you might be able to get the parish priest or the parish secretary to make a copy of it for you. And again, Grenham's book does have the parish maps. They're also online on his website as well. So if you want to take a look to see if you're trying to locate where the proper parish is in your particular county, Grenham's book is a good way to take a look at that. Now, if your ancestors were Anglican, there are fewer records available, even though they kept records. A lot of them were destroyed in the 1922 Civil War. Some of them might have survived. There might be a transcript that somebody kept, or the minister might have neglected to send it to the records office, or he might have kept a copy of it to keep in the parish. These church records, these established church records, the Anglican records, were the only ones that were considered legal in a court until the 19th century. And again, Roots Ireland and Family Search do have indexes, and some of them also have transcriptions of records if you're looking for that, but very few images you're going to be able to find for Anglican records. This was also the church that was in charge of taking care of the poor until 1838 when the poor law unions were developed. So another option, if you're looking for your Anglican ancestors, is what they call the vestry books. These would be the books that the parishioners were discussing business in the church. They were responsible before the poor law unions were put into effect to levy taxes for local services. They were the ones in charge of road repair, paying the police or the constables. Family Search does have a lot of the vestry books that survived online that you could take a look at. So there is another avenue open to you. For those of you with Scots-Irish or Ulster Scots ancestors, if you are able to go all the way back to Scotland, if you go to Northern Ireland and then trace your ancestors back to Scotland, there's a similar set of books for the Church of Scotland too, that will be very of interest to you if you're researching your ancestors in there. So some of the websites that we've talked about, but also too, some of them that are you're going to have a lot of the records that you're looking for, or at least indexes. We're looking at the Family History Foundation. It is subscription based if you're looking for Northern Irish. Then we have Irish Genealogy. That's the government site for the South. That's a free site. You have Ancestry Library Edition. They have indexes for certain years. Family Search has some records as well as the indexes available to them. Grenham's Irish Ancestors will give you a clue as to where they might be located that you could find them. Find My Past has a lot of Irish records. They started out as being the Great Britain place where you could find all of those for England, Scotland, Wales, as well as Ireland. We have a library subscription to that, but you'll find a lot of records on Find My Past. The Ulster History Foundation is also a paid site, but if your ancestors come from the north, that would be a good place to go look to see what kind of records they have available, because they've got a lot of private collections that aren't online that might be of interest. And search the internet. You know, if you're looking for a particular parish, say you're looking for Dublin Parish and you're looking for whatever transcribed records might be out there, just type in your search engine, you know, Dublin Parish, Ireland, transcribed records, and see what pops up. Because there's a lot of different smaller websites like GenWeb and those kind of things that might have certain transcriptions that people have done over the years, and they put them on those particular websites and they might not be on the others. Some places that you can locate records. They may not be online, but they'll give you an idea. The National Archives of Ireland has a lot of information on genealogy research and records available there. They also have a free service if you want to write to them or send a mail to them and ask them, you know, I'm looking for this particular ancestor. Here's the birth date. Here's the death date. Do you think any of your archives might have any records for this particular person? And then I've got this book here, A Table of Church of Ireland Parochial Records and Copies. This is a good one to kind of give you a bird's eye view of where you might find records. The National Library of Ireland, they also have all the Roman Catholic parish records, or most of them, up prior to 1880. And again, Find My Past has a vast majority of them. Here's one of the books down here at the bottom. We have, for those of you who don't know, we're having the Ulster History Foundation come in tomorrow for an in-person seminar. And they published this book, Directory of Irish Archives, which is a very good book if you're trying to find an archive in the area you're looking for your ancestors. And it'll give you information on what you might be able to find there, and contact information if you want to contact them. Of course, it also gives you a good excuse to plan a trip out to Ireland too, so you never know. Poor law union and workhouse records. Here's an example of what and they've cleaned it up a bit, but this is an example of what the workhouses looked like. This is one in Galway. I mean, it was just a very thin mattress that people slept on. And there were very many of them in one single room. So by 1838, when the poor law unions were established and the church was getting out of taking care of the poor, these workhouses started coming up in the market towns mainly. They would house them, give them work wherever work was located. There was also dispensary districts in this general vicinity for medical attention if they needed it. A lot of migration came from the overflow of workhouses. If you are looking for Northern Irish, we've talked about this before, but PRE, or the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, is the place to go and starting. A lot of them went into Liverpool because Liverpool was a port city. So there was a lot of work to be done, either fixing ships, traveling on ships. So you might find some information in English records. So you would look in the England workhouse records. Sometimes they would be sent elsewhere to work for 6 months, and then they might have gotten passage to the US. And like I said before, after a while, poor law union kind of had a negative connotation. So they changed it to superintendent registrar districts. Same boundaries, different name. And here's the exterior version of that same workhouse in Galway. So you can see it's a pretty big structure. There is no comprehensive guide with a lot of things in Ireland, but we do have this particular book, Records of the Irish Famine, a Guide to Local Archives, which can kind of narrow down what you're looking for. There's also a book on the workhouses of Ireland. It's more of a historical perspective, but it kind of gives you an idea of where they were located and where you might be able to find certain records for those. Then we have census records. Unfortunately, most of the 1821 to 1891 census records were destroyed. What's left of those, plus we still have the 1901 and the 1911 censuses. You can find those at the National Archive of Ireland, as well as Find My Past, Family Search. I believe Ancestry's got the index. Again, there was no census taken in 1921 because of the Civil War. So the next census that would be available in Ireland would be the 1926 census. And according to the National Archives in Ireland, that should be released sometime in 2027. But this is an example of a page of an Irish census. Looks pretty similar to a US census. So then we get to the famine, which was starts around 1945 to 1951. And as we know, it started because of a potato blight. We talked a little bit about that. It was also called the Great Hunger. A lot of this time, during this time period, when they immigrated, and there was a vast majority of Irish that did immigrate during this time period. Not only did they go to the US, but they also went to Canada first. Some of them came from Canada to the US, some of them just stayed in Canada because there's a big Irish population in certain areas of Canada. And Grosse Isle and the Irish Memorial National Historical Society is pretty much sort of like our Ellis Island version. Sometimes the ships, and it all depended, we have English ships and we have US ships. Normally the US ships were in better condition than the English ships, which is where we get the idea of coffin ships, because at some point, the English ships that were going from Ireland or from Liverpool to Canada, say, were a lot slower than the US ships. And about 30% of the population, passengers on those ships, would have died on the journey because it took so much longer. And there was not enough supplies to feed everybody or to house everybody or to clothe everybody. So those were really horrible conditions. And they do have a memorial in Canada because of that. We talked about the Boston Pilot last time. It is still an excellent newspaper for Irish people looking for their relatives. And even if they didn't make a pit stop in Boston, but they might have traveled through the location going west, for better land, they might have put an ad in the paper. So don't forget newspapers, not just the Boston Pilot, but other newspapers, to see if there is an advertisement in there looking for an ancestor. We also have something called the New York Immigrant Savings Bank, which you can find that information on Ancestry. A lot of the times, if single women immigrated, they might have gotten a job as a servant or something to that effect. They would send money home to a brother or another member of the family, and they would use this as their bank. Also, too, I think we talked about evictions last time. The Irish Famine Eviction Project, which is at the irishfamineeviction.com, is putting together, it's not complete yet, but they're putting together a lot of information on the Irish who were evicted from their lands because of rack renting. We talked about that. So that would be another avenue to explore if you're Irish. Might have been, you don't know until you've looked. I always say exhaust every possibility. Even if you don't think they were evicted and they just left, check it out anyway, just to see. And then the passenger list. Our National Archives has a lot of good information on their website about passenger lists. You can find those passenger lists on Ancestry, Find My Past and Family Search, among other places. Church records during this time period, because now we're into the time period where you're going to find a lot of Catholic church records. Find My Past and Family Search. We've talked about title allotment books. Those are on Ancestry as well as Family Search. We also have, during this time period, Griffin's Valuation, where they took a survey of who owned land, who were the tenants on the land, or who occupied the land, and how much the rent was or how much the land was worth. And you'll find pretty much every head of a household in that particular document. And you can find that just about everywhere. Ask About Ireland does have a good introduction to Griffins if you're interested in the history behind that. It's kind of interesting because Griffin, who actually did the valuation, he was Scottish. He had originally done a similar evaluation in Scotland, and then they brought him over to Ireland to do the exact same thing. So when we talk about civil registration, you're going to need to know the Superintendent Registrar's District. It started in 1845 for the Church of Ireland first, and for just marriages, and then all birth, marriages, and deaths started in 1864. Again, the Superintendent Registrar's District was basically another name for the Poor Law Union. So if you find out what the Poor Law Union was, that's going to be, you'll know where the Superintendent Registrar's District was. Again, there are a lot of places, a lot of websites. Roots Ireland is one that will help you narrow things down. You can narrow it down also too with parents' names for births and fathers' names for marriages, because those will be listed there as well. Again, if you're doing Northern Ireland, you're going to go to PRE. Family History, or it's now called the Family Search Library, and Ancestry have indexes for the civil registration records up through 1958, I believe. If you're looking for something later than that, you might need to talk to the registrar's office. It's not a complete list, obviously, but there is quite a lot of information on that. Here's an example of a birth record from 1864. And basically what it's going to give you is the name of the child, the father's name, the location he's from, the town he's from, the mother's name, including her maiden name, and the town she's from, if they're different. The occupation of the father, and then it's going to give you dates. And then at the top of the page, you're going to get the registrar's district, the town, the townland, and all that other information. And like I said, even looking at this particular page here, it's not exactly the clearest. If you find an actual image on a microfilm or a digital copy, but fortunately it's in English and it's pretty good to decipher if you can read cursive very well. But for one particular entry, you get a lot of information. You already know the maiden name, you can search that particular line. If you find out the father's name, you can find out if there's other children that were born to that couple. So it does give you a ton of information to start your searches. Then we move to the post-famine to the partition, which is around 51 to 21. Again, we're going to have Griffin's valuation because that took several years to finish. You also have estate courts. If, for example, there was some sort of legal action taken against a particular estate, and let's say your ancestor was a tenant on that estate, they might have been mentioned in the records. So there is, you know, do check out the legal records, and it may not be in Ireland, it might be in England. And this is around the time period where the Church of Ireland was disestablished. They started selling off their land. They started allowing government, as opposed to the church, take care of the poor, et cetera, et cetera. And that happened around 1869. This is also around the time period that the Irish themselves wanted to govern themselves. So you're going to see a lot of things in, especially in the Irish newspapers, on self-government. You have also during this time period, the Easter Rising in 1916, as well as the Irish War of Independence. And they came right one after the other. You start out with the Irish War of Independence against the British, and then right after that, there's a civil war between the Irish and the Irish. So if your ancestor came along this time period, again, we're going to look for any records that have to do with valuation of property. Definitely civil registration, and some places you can look for that. You've got the 1901 and the 1911 censuses, which are indexed and available in many different places. Catholic Church records for this time period, as well as wills and testamentary records. Again, if somebody who owned land and your Irish ancestor was a tenant or an occupier on that land and they left them something, it will be in the landowner's will. A lot of the poor Irish probably didn't have a will, but they might have been a good tenant to the landowner and they might have given them something or mentioned them at least in the will. And a lot of those you can find either the actual will, more likely a transcription of the will, or the index of a will in the National Archives or Family Search Ancestry and Find My Past. So why were all these records lost? You know, we've been talking about different records, and we know that some records, because of governmental regulations, weren't created, but a lot of them were. And during the Civil War, after the Irish War of Independence, there was a treaty that was signed between the British and the Irish. The treaty set up what they called a provisional government, which meant that the Irish could set up a government, but the British were going to oversee that government to make sure they knew how to do it. They also gave the option for any of the counties in Ulster or Northern Ireland to vote whether they wanted to stay with the Republic or to stay with the British. A lot of Irish thought that that was a very poor treaty, and they were against it. A lot of Irish were for it simply because it gave them something more than they had before. Unfortunately, those who were against the treaty decided that they were going to create a disturbance in order to let the British know that they were not happy with it and they didn't want to abide by it. So the Public Record Office for the South was in Dublin, and the anti-treaty forces occupied that building. They took it over. They put ammunition in that building. They put cannons and guns in that building. And when they were fired upon, And if anybody had been to the last, we talked about this in our Irish special interest group. I showed you a video that showed the destruction of the Public Record Office. I mean, they blew that thing up. And a lot of the documents were destroyed during that period. They were blown up, they were scattered all through the town, as well as just burned up entirely. There were some indications based on some of the articles that I read in some of the Irish newspapers that after the whole thing was done and the pro-treaty forces took over the Public Record Office and captured everybody who was in there, there were some people who went around trying to salvage whatever records they could find. So what was destroyed? Okay, as we know, the censuses. Most of the censuses, we have certain fragments before 1901. Most of the wills were destroyed, but we have indexes that survived, as well as transcriptions were surviving. Most of the Church of Ireland church registers were destroyed because they were kept there in the Public Record Office because that was the established church at the time. Some of them did survive. And again, Noel Reed's book, A Table of Church of Ireland Parochial Records and Copies, will kind of give you an idea of where in that particular parish they survived and what was destroyed and will not be able. And again, remember too, we talked earlier, some of the ministers may have neglected to send their records to the Public Record Office, or they might have made copies of the records. So then again, we're back to the parish where you're going to might find copies of something that may not have been in the Public Record Office at all, or was destroyed in the Public Record Office. Which leads us up to the end of the 20th century, where we had that political unrest in Northern Ireland that probably a lot of you saw in the news if you were around at that time period. It wasn't necessarily a religious conflict, it was a political one. You had the Unionists who wanted Northern Ireland to remain with the United Kingdom. Those were the people who had voted back in 1922 to stay with Great Britain. Then you have the Irish Nationals. They were mostly Catholic because they were from the South, and most of the South is Catholic. They wanted Northern Ireland to join the Republic. They wanted to be a united Ireland once again. So we had numerous talks with the different political parties. At the end of the 1990s, we have the Good Friday Agreement. That's what ended the conflict for the most part. Again, it allowed Northern Ireland to self-govern themselves as long as the main parties were involved. So you would have the Unionists, the Nationalists, the Labour Party, and Sinn Féin. All together, they would be the ones to govern Northern Ireland. The Republic still had their own government, which they got from the Irish War of Independence. But again, they're not together necessarily, but they are not fighting one another as much as they were. There's still some animosity in certain areas because of the Protestant versus Catholic conflict that a lot of the newspapers made it out to be, but for the most part, it's not bad. You can now visit Northern Ireland without worrying too much about car bombs and that kind of thing. But again, this is another example of where if you're looking for records saying Northern Ireland and Prony's located in Belfast, some records might have been destroyed during that time period as well. So just be aware that it's not just the older stuff that was destroyed or not created. It might have been stuff a lot newer than that might not be around anymore. And one thing that a lot of people forget, but what is a great source for information are periodicals. We have a lot of Irish periodicals. This is just some titles that we do have, but there are many, many others. A lot of these will have information on certain areas, or they might have transcriptions of things that you won't find online anywhere else. So do take a look at some of the periodicals on occasion to see if maybe your ancestors listed in a document that they have published in those as well. And with that, that brings us to the end of this particular part of Irish research. Once again, if you guys have a question that you don't get answered today, feel free to send us an email. We have a query service, mgc@mymcpl.org. We can take a look at that. You can also give us a call if you want to talk to somebody right then and there, and maybe we can set something up or we can find the answer for you quickly. Depends on what the question is. But we're going to open up to questions now. And if anybody has one, let us know. We're going to start here in class first, and then we'll go online and we'll just kind of go back and forth until we run out of questions. Any questions here? Anybody? I have answered every question you ever had, and you're just all ready to research, right?
The last one, the first one.
Uh-huh.
The one I needed.
Yeah, actually, too, we have a recording of last week's online.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it'll be up there for 3 months, I believe.
No, it's a month. Right?
It's a month.
30 days.
30 days. Okay, yeah. So if you want to see that first one again and kind of reacquaint yourself with land divisions and that kind of thing, it's on our YouTube channel.
I've got a question.
Yep.
Back at a previous class, but I was looking to see, and I realized it would take more time than it would be a short answer, but where, if I had a name change in my surname, family history, what would be some good places to research that, and possibly why would they have changed the name?
Was the name change done here in the US?
No.
It was done back in Ireland?
I think when they came here in the 1870s, it was changed. So it may have been when they immigrated to the US.
Okay. So they wanted their last name, whatever that was, to be more Anglo as opposed to more Irish.
Perhaps.
So they were
yeah.
trying to assimilate a little bit more. Excuse me. Back then, there's not necessarily going to be a court record that said we legally changed our name from this to this. They may have just said, okay, we want to call ourselves this now. They did that a lot.
Okay.
If you can narrow it down to approximate time period where they changed that name, if the census records show the new name and then maybe an earlier census record shows the old name, you can probably kind of get a hint of, again, back in Ireland, there's not going to be necessarily an actual court document that said we legally changed our name.
It wouldn't passenger list. So the passenger list would have the original name.
Whatever name they were using at the time, the passenger
Well, when they
list
went
will
back,
have,
they wouldn't
yeah.
put American name.
Yeah, normally you'll see, for example, and the example I use is Bailey. Okay, we all know Bailey is spelled, for the most part, B-A-I-L-E-Y, but it was spelled numerous different ways. But in Ireland specifically, it was spelled B-A-I-L-I-E. So when the ancestors came over, that's how it was spelled on the passenger list, but they would have probably Americanized it to B-A-I-L-E-Y in subsequent documents. So if you can't find a change of surname in a census record or a church record, perhaps, and see what the passenger list says. If the passenger list does survive, that will probably be the name they were using in Ireland.
Thank you.
Anything online, Mary?
Not that I did about the almighty. Do they have any questions? Nothing.
Okay, any other questions? You guys are so easy. I do want to mention for those of you here in class, and I do believe there's still a few spots open tomorrow afternoon at 3. The Ulster Historical Foundation is going to be here to do their seminar. It is free. It is in person only, but it is free if you want to go ahead and register for that, if there's still seats available. Last I heard, there were still a few seats available. And we're going to have it next door in the big auditorium. So, and it's a very, very good presentation. So if you guys are interested in, and they're not going to talk just about the North. They're going to talk about the South as well. They do the whole island. So if you're interested in any of that information, do feel free to come and see that. It starts at 3 tomorrow. It runs from 3 to 7 tomorrow.
Yeah, that's what I saw. It was 4 hours long.
Yeah. Oh, they got a lot to say. And most of the time you're going to say, gosh, I didn't know that. I mean, I did that for a while. It's like, gosh, I didn't know that. Oh, that book sounds like a good book for me.
Will you be recording that so that we can review it again afterwards?
No, not that I know of. I don't think that that'll be recorded. But like I said, you know I'm going to be attending it just to make sure I haven't missed anything in the classes that I'm teaching or the ancestors that I'm researching, because just like you guys, I have brick walls too, and it's always nice to get some more information from people who are actually knee deep in that information to find out some other places that I can go to find more information. So, but yeah, if you're interested, feel free to do that. Mary, anything? I have answered all their questions. My gosh, they are just ready to rock and roll, aren't they?
They're on it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not going to keep you if there aren't any more questions. However, do use the email address if you come up with something later and say, you know, I'm wondering about this. Where's some resources that I can go to for that? And we will send you an email back letting you know what we have found and what we have available here, as well as other places as well. Or if you just want to say, I'd like to come in for a consult. We can do an hour-long consult. Here's my brick wall. Give me an idea of where I need to go to break down some of this brick wall. And we can help you with that. So, but unless we have any other questions. Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question about tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
Would it be worth staying for the whole time if we have the earlier ancestors?
And I don't know how they're going to do it this year. If they're going to start with the earliest ancestors and then go through, or they're just going to do a general talk about, okay, here's Northern Ireland, here's the Southern Ireland, or here's the whole group of Irish. I'm not quite sure how they've got it spaced out this year, because every year they do something different on the North American tour. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, you could come in and just kind of get a heads up on how they're going to present, and then you might be able to stay for part of it or come back for the later half if that sounds like something that you would prefer.
Do they offer a break in between?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There'll be several breaks. Yeah. They know people need to use the restroom.
What are they serving for dinner?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I was wondering about that. Yeah, something with potatoes in it, right? Well, if there's no other questions, for those of you in class, feel free to fill out your surveys and leave them with us. For those of you online, you should be getting an email in the next day or so with a survey attached. Please feel free to. See you tomorrow, probably. Yes, okay. Feel free to fill that out and send that back to us. And with that, have a great day, folks. Thank you.